Hi, my name is Jack Ostrofsky. I'm the chair of BIM4HAs Housing Associations, and coincidentally, I'm the head of design and sustainability at Southern Housing Group. But here I'm to talk to you about the asset information model that has been generated and published and vetted by BIM4HAs Housing Association. So a good place to start would be, what is an asset information model? And there is a industry standard, or there's an industry definition, which would be more accurate. And here it is up here on the screen. And it's the information that you need to support strategic and your day-to-day asset management processes. And it's managed in a systematic way. So when it says managed in a systematic way, it's talking about your information. And what's really critical to understand about this, and we're talking in the context of BIM, and there's a lot of misconceptions that BIM is about design software or your design process. It's about your information, and this very simplified schematic shows the asset information phase is your operational phase. 3/4, 75% of everything that's important about your information when it comes to buildings and specifically the social housing sector, it's at least 75%. So that's a very quick canter through what is an asset information model. But what I'd like to talk to you about today is obviously what is this asset information model. So it's a blueprint for building and component data, and it is an interrelational database, which is a bit of a mouthful for me, and it includes everything that a social housing provider needs to run its assets in a systematic way from the strategic to the day-to-day. And it was the output of about £250,000 of investment that was made by Southern Housing Group. And the rationale for this was to meet the building safety requirements under the building safety regime that's now an act. And also, in order to do that efficiently, it encompasses all of the activities. So it's not just about building safety. It has a wider scope than that. And this was donated to BIM4HAs Housing Associations that orchestrated a series of workshops, and the input from some of the housing providers that you see with their logos here, and some specialist architects and some BIM experts. I think it was a fantastic test run of what was and what wasn't important for that interrelational database. I think it's very important to clarify that these are the people who participated in the workshops. They're not necessarily endorsing or not endorsing the output here. So one thing that I can say with a great deal of confidence and gratitude is that the expertise from all the people that participated in, from these organizations made this asset information model a lot more useful and a lot more robust. Now, I'm going to move on to go further into the detail of what this thing is, and a good place to start to describe what something is to tell you exactly what it isn't. So here we have the data that was outside of the scope of this project, and it doesn't talk about customer services, tenancies, land acquisition, and certainly human resources and finances. That's outside of this. So what is included is a nice little list here of, it is your single source of accurate truth for asset management purposes. It supports golden thread compliance, but as I mentioned before, it's scalable to all asset management areas, and it's to provide enhanced insights to improve decision making. It is very important to note that it's based on external standards. That makes it interoperable from outside your organization, and it makes it interoperable within your organization, so information can be transferred in a machine readable way from different software programs. And it certainly is software agnostic. So that means it's not based on any particular type of software. It's based on database language. One of the things that it also wants to do is provide a single point of access to that source of truth. So here's a little bit of fun, a little bit of make you think a little bit, so it's not just a one-way street. Obviously, you're not going to be talking back to me because this is a recording, but give me a chance to think about what is an asset. And it's a simple question. but everybody's got a different view on this. So is it a building? Is it an object in a building like a radiator? Could be a member of staff. You got a good member on your team. They'll certainly be an asset. Is it something else of value, or is it all of the above? For the purposes of this discussion, it is not really any of those. It's very specific. It's the buildings or properties, and objects are components. It's buildings and objects, and those are the things that you need to manage your assets effectively. So moving on, there is some key terminology that is essential to understand when we're engaging in this particular topic. So there are entities, keys, and relationships. Entities are, it could be an Excel spreadsheet. In SQL, which is the language that underpins this particular asset information model, they're called tables. Keys, these are basically the fields. Could be, you know, a box in your worksheet, in your Excel worksheet, in any type of database. They're the fields where you put the data. It could be a word, could be a number, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're essential for a single source of truth when they're arranged and controlled properly. And that is defined by, or that rather it's enabled by the primary key, which is single and unique. And it's useful for identifying sole records like a unique property reference number. A foreign key is taking a primary key from other tables or other entities and putting it into a new table. So an example would be a dwelling level UPRN or dwelling level address. They might be the foreign keys on an estate scheme table or an estate scheme entity. And they would list all of the homes on a single estate. Those would all be the foreign keys derived from the other primary key into that single estate table. So the other part about this is the links between this information, and that connects one entity to another. So there are rules set up in this asset information model that it's compulsory that a sales record must be linked to a tenancy. You can't sell a property unless you know what it is that you're selling. But there are optional ones where, for example, if you're testing your boiler or test certificate number, they are only required after you do the test or after you do a particular type of check. But before that, these things can be empty. So, you know, there's a huge amount of depth. Those are just a couple of examples to illustrate what an entity, a key, and a relationship is. These will be referred to a couple of times in the rest of the presentation. So another thing about this, in order for it to be clear, is that there are three types of data, and it's structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. So I'm going to give some practical examples for each one of these, and then describe what types of structures underpin the asset information model. I'm going to start with the structured stuff. So starting with structured data, these are formatted in a way that can be manipulated using SQL language. It is SQL language, and that makes it direct machinable, uploadable. So that means that one software system can read it from another one and can be put into and taken out of the asset information model in an automated way. So some examples of that are the UK housing standard that was produced by the Housing Association Charitable Trust. Some people call that HACT standards. And it also includes unique class code lists and standalone MS Access systems and the data, the native data in an organizational software system. So, you know, what you have in your organization may or may not be SQL, but those are examples of types of structured data. So a little bit more on that. Here, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about what that is in particular. So the UK Housing Data Standard has numbers, they have codes that are attributed to text that are the descriptions. And these are already publicly available in the domain free of charge. and they can be downloaded and used, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have any curiosity about that, you can contact us at BIM for Housing Associations or go to Hacked or whatever. But more importantly, back to the presentation, is an example of an unit adaptation type. So this is when you have a wheelchair adapted unit, and if you were to have wide doorways in that particular property, the property would have the code number 40 in this data field, and that would mean that it has wide doorways. And if you were to transfer this from one data model into another, and 40 was in that particular field, you would know wide doorway is in that particular tenancy. So that's how it works. That's an example of structured data. Here's another one, and this is something that was when it comes to works orders. So this is linking the activities associated with your property, and if you have a works order that is open or closed or canceled or completed or reopened, there's certain code numbers in the UK Housing Data Standard that can be used to describe that, and that makes it transferable, machine readable, interoperable, etc. There are things that were taken from the Open Standards Consortium for Real Estate, OSCAR is the acronym, that were not in the UK Housing Data Standard, where we've added them because they're for automatic fire suppression systems. And here's some additional code. So there's probably no need to belabor the point about the codes and how it works, but just to describe a little bit more about what's in the particular data model. So really important, though, is moving away from the housing standards is that unit class is also included and is accommodated for. So this makes it compatible with your development program, because almost everything that occurs within the development sphere is going to be associated or have the ability to become to use unit class code lists. So your designers will understand this, or they should understand it, and that's included in your data model. So structured data, done with that for now. Type 2 is semi-structured. So this is your CSV, your XML. This is your ordinary spreadsheet that somebody might have created, and it requires ETL. This is something that I learned, extract, transform, load techniques to upload into an international database. So that, you know, your data modelers might call that an API, but there is a way for the information that is semi-structured, that might be in an ordinary, quote unquote, an ordinary spreadsheet, to be hoovered up, to use my terminology, you might hoover it up and into your system, into your asset information model. So I think it's just spreadsheets, incoming data from standardized format, emails, SMX text messages, that can be accommodated. So there's unstructured data, the unruly type. This is where we have a huge amount of very valuable information, and that includes your media files, pictures, Word documents, non-standardized spreadsheets, your unruly spreadsheet, your homemade spreadsheet, whatever. The model has fields to link instances of these file types to a tenancy, to a communal area, to an estate. So if you have a survey or an EWS1 form that was printed and photocopied, then it can be linked to that, O&M manuals, BBA certificates, etc. All that really important stuff to demonstrate your building safety case. And it could include EPCs for your net zero carbon pathways, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the 3 types of data that the asset information model can accommodate, and that's everything. So here it is. This very complex looking slide is the tip of the iceberg, because this is basically a schematic of what is contained, or basically how this is described in a database way. So obviously not very comprehensible unless you have the time to study and you have a little bit of foresight or foreknowledge about what that might be. But to help make sense of all of that, we have some of the diagram entities. So remember, these are the tables, and that are that I referenced before, and you have to make the database, to make the asset information model relevant to property. It has a spatial hierarchy. So there is how you have a site ID, that's where it is, and then a couple of other key pieces of information that can make sense of that in a database way. So the things that Southern Housing Group has sourced data objects, they're shown in the cream background, but the UK housing data standards are, that's all the gray pieces that make those external standards importable into this asset information model. And, you know, sometimes it's referenced to Southern Housing Group, but this is what's been given away. This is what's been validated by the BIM4HAs Association workshop. So please take those terms as interchangeable as well. Now, there's a couple of other examples here about the keys. And when you look at this particular slide, this is probably a really key slide when it comes to data keys, and I didn't mean that, but it's very important to say that the primary keys, that's what makes your single source of truth, the site ID. If you change it here in the asset information model, it changes everywhere. Foreign keys are things that are imported from other tables that are in the 101 site table. And normal keys are things that, well, they're shown in black there. To the keys, here's an example of the relationships. So your golden thread relationships are shown in red. Those are the things that are critical for your golden thread, for your building safety, and your single source of truth. Other relationships are shown in green, and then there, in a little bit of detail, you see the crow's feet about, you know, where one thing may relate to several things. And optional relationships are shown with dotted lines. So if you really wanted to drill down onto that schematic, this is a key for you to help you understand that. So going back to, there it is again, there's the beast. And to make sense of that, here a little bit more, there's the tables of your spatial hierarchy, and then you have your components and your systems, building systems, warranties, components, those are the things inside the buildings. There's some template examples and some other features there. The spatial reference, this shows where the component is in the spatial hierarchy. So therefore, you're able to find where the boiler is in the building using this, and your data model will accurately reflect your built asset. Works orders. This is for you to track what happens to the things in your buildings, what happens to your buildings. And there you could see in the gray that has the hacked codes, the UK housing data standards and work orders, and the terminology and the number referencing system. So you can instruct to an external contractor, follow the UK housing data standards when you're reporting to me, when you're giving me your data on work orders, and then that can be machine read into the asset information model. Component actions, so that logs when things happen and has the ability to also collect when, why, and who in a structured way. And relevant parties, that's the ability to track who and what organizations have carried out the work on your buildings and components. And all of these things collected together enables your golden thread. You know where things are, you know what things are, you know who's worked on it, and there's where it ties into your competency, and you know when the things have happened. Documentation is the output of that, so you can keep recording things, but it also has the ability to reference and keep track of all of your fire and emergency files, your fire strategies, your operation manuals, and your health and safety files, and everything that should be in those particular, within those packages of documentation. I'm going to explain how this can work with your existing assets and your existing software, because the model has the ability to have a dual spatial hierarchy. Now, what is shown here on the graphical depiction and that text over there is that Southern Housing Group has its own unique property referencing numbering system. So that's not the national standard. That's how we at Southern Housing Group have, we describe our assets in a database way, and Keystone and Orchard. So if you're in the sector, you will have heard of Keystone and Orchard, which are prolific software systems for doing asset management and asset management and repairs. So the existing Southern Housing has, we use the terminology estate to describe site, building, property, cores and dwellings, and this enables spatially accurate downloads from development projects that are using the industry standards, industry foundation class, and COBE, and that information from that development program can be automatically mapped across using this asset information model hierarchy into the existing systems, and that's something that it can enable for your native systems as well. So in addition to what I've just explained, I think this is a really useful slide to illustrate how the spatial hierarchy can relate to an actual building. And that ties into one of the really key benefits of the asset information model. It can tell you where things are, locating things that are important. And that is finding your buildings, finding the things that are inside of them, and finding things within your building, like spaces, like cores, et cetera, et cetera. And this is very important for your golden thread purposes to be identified critically and have one editable instance that gives you that single source of truth. Some life safety examples of what that might be. And if you have a smoke detector recall, where are the smoke detectors? Are they in block 1 or block 2? The asset information model will enable you to find all of that. And emergency access to a lift shaft, you can tell you which room or space and which floor the access to that lift shaft is from. So it also tells you aim functionality and benefits. It also tells you what can profile your assets much more effectively across your portfolio. Buildings, how it's laid out, what's the usage and type, how does it relate to other buildings or in the group stock. And really that, okay, the first part of your buildings, you probably might be satisfied with what your existing software might be able to offer, but you can drill down now into, if you're using this asset information model, into the components, determine what the performance is, purpose, how to classify it, count them, and how do they interact with each other, and what warranties you have. So if you have a sprinkler head recall, you can find out, or if you're trying to profile the performance of a particular smoke detector system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can relate it to what it is, and you can extract all of this detail from that. And of course, you can tell when things were installed, when work has been carried on it, when it needs to have more work, is it scheduled or reactive, and what's the purpose and scope of any upcoming work, and how it will need to be undertaken. You also capture who were the actors who commissioned the work, actors being you, who determined that it needed to be done. You can find out, of course, it will record who carried it out, authorized, internal, external staff, individuals, companies, a lot of other details. And the most important thing maybe that about this presentation is, why should you be paying attention to this? Why is this important? What's the whole point? Why implement a new asset information model? Well, to improve the understanding of your assets, future-proof your ability to respond to safety, sustainability, and regulatory agendas. Also, what the very explicit purpose of Southern Housing Group was to donate this is that what we want to do is influence software providers so they are not telling us what they can offer us, but we are articulating what we need from them. And we hope that you at least engage with this, assess it, and hopefully make use of it in order to steer the market in a way that the golden thread can be delivered and all of the other benefits. and it will increase our ability to keep our residents safe. So there's a little bit more about why. The regulator of social housing has said to the sector, accurate stock condition data is vital. It needs to be robust. It needs to be much more comprehensive than we currently hold now. And quote unquote, the housing providers that are able to turn their data into insight at board level and offer greater levels of insurance will be differentiated from other social housing providers. The Department for Leveling Up and Housing Communities Health and Safety Executive have shared with us already the Golden Thread principles. The Building Safety Bill, well, it's no longer a bill, it's now an act. And what I'm really talking about is Golden Thread. Again, as mentioned before, this asset information model is specifically designed to meet those principles that will become law in, well, less than a year now. So we hope that was informative. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact BIM4 Housing Associations. We're really happy to talk to you about this. And thank you for your time and your interest.